So hopefully you watched the previous video that talked about the male reproductive tract and how the sperm is going to be produced and passed off to the female reproductive tract. And so this one's going to pick up from there. Not necessarily in the same order, like I don't want to start kind of at the bottom and work our way up. I want to start kind of like we did with males with how the oocyte is formed and where. So we'll go through the tract first, then we'll talk about some major events that happen along it. So we'll have production in the ovary. The ovary is the female gonad. So a lot of people don't realize that both genders have a gonad. We're used to thinking of gonad and thinking of testes a lot of times, but ovary is the same thing. The definition of a gonad being that it's making a haploid cell, and it is, well, it's a haploid cell for reproductive purposes, and it's going to be making some reproductive hormones. So ovary making an egg, and estrogen and progesterone are going to be the hormones that it's going to secrete. So ovary, when when ovulation occurs, is going to secrete an egg into the site of fertilization, which is a fallopian tube. Instead of calling it a fallopian tube, let's go with its technical term, the uterine tube. So uterine tube, from there to the uterus, and out the bottom, which will serve as the site of sperm deposition, but also the birth canal, will be the vagina. All right, so let's talk about some things with each of these. So with the ovary, let's do the talk about what's in there first. So within the ovary, you're going to have the developing egg, and we're going to protect it by wrapping it in a bunch of cells, which are going to be the follicles. So we have follicles surrounding oocytes, these developing cells. So females aren't going to have any oogonium. They're not going to have any stem cells like we saw with males. The oogonium are actually going to be gone before the female's ever born. They're going to go through mitosis. They're going to make the primary oocytes. That's all females will have for the rest of their lives. And so we're going to protect them with these follicles. So there's going to be different ones. So we'll put these in order. So we'll start with a primordial follicle. Then we'll have a primary, a secondary, an antrial, because we're going to make something called an antrium, followed by a mature. All right, so let's talk about what's making all of these unique and kind of what's inside of each of them. So primordial is going to look like, if you're going to picture it, simple squamous around the outside. Your primary, that cell's going to thicken up, so it's going to look more like simple cuboidal. Secondary is going to have multiple layers now, so now we're going to go into stratified cuboidal. And then antrial are going to form an antrium. So an antrium being like a little waterbed that's going to be in there. So we're going to have the same look here. We're going to have that stratified cuboidal look. But now we're going to have an antrium. So a little waterbed space. And the mature looks exactly the same. The difference is what's on the inside. All of these right here are going to go around a primary oocyte. This one here has a secondary oocyte. So primary oocyte meaning that it's going through meiosis 1. Secondary oocyte because we're in meiosis 2. Now another interesting thing with females is they don't finish meiosis before fertilization. It's kind of like, why go through the process of completing this division if we're not going to use it? This is what's secreted during ovulation. So if ovulation were to occur, so we're going to try to draw this. So we're going to have our ovary. Ooh, squeaky. We're going to have that follicle that's surrounding it. We have that oocyte kind of hanging out over here. Some more follicular cells wrapped around it. Here's our little water bed. What's going to happen is this is going to get released. So then this leaves. And you're left with still all of these follicular cells out here. That has a name, because we name everything. So we're going to do ovulation, so that's the process. To release that secondary oocyte, or ovum, the thing that's left behind is called a corpus luteum. That is functional. It's actually going to secrete hormones. Actually, all of these can secrete hormones. So all of these up here can secrete estrogen. And so can this. But it will also secrete progesterone, which will be a signal to the uterus to say, hey, we ovulated. Heads up, we ovulated. You might want to lay out some food. And that's exactly the signaling to the endometrium. And we'll spend some time on that down here a little bit to say, hey, this could get fertilized. We need to have some glucose there to feed this developing offspring. Now, if fertilization doesn't occur, we don't need to keep sending that. And so what'll happen is this corpus luteum is actually going to degrade and become more like scar tissue and leftover. And so the color changes. Corpus means body, luteum means yellow. So we have a yellow body, and then it will change into a corpus. And if it's scar tissue, it'll white. So it'll turn into a corpus albicans. That doesn't secrete anything. So you don't secrete hormones anymore. All right, so that kind of covers some major events in the ovary. We'll talk a little bit more in another video about really kind of how we communicate between all of these hormones. Oh, actually, before we get to uterus, we should talk about the major event that happens here. This is a huge life event because without it, there's no life. So here, ovary, all of this stuff. Uterine tube, what's going on there that's so cool? That's the site of fertilization. So that's where the sperm and the egg will come together to make a zygote. Uterus, a couple of things about that is I want to talk a little bit about the lining. So with the uterus, we're going to have a few layers. The outer perimetrium, so we'll just kind of do it like this. Then there's going to be a muscular layer. That's the myometrium. Myo means muscle. So it's a muscular layer. Why have a muscular layer? To attract a baby. So this is going to provide most of the force for birth, but also cramping each month to help kind of remove the inner layer that's getting shed during menses. Smooth muscle. No voluntary say over that, unfortunately. That would be great. Now I'm reminiscing. My son, when I was pregnant with him, when it was time for him to come out, uterine contractions nice and slow, once every hour for 3 days. I didn't have any say about like, okay, you can go now. So smooth muscle. All right, innermost lining, that's the one that the progesterone is talking to that provides a glucose-rich mucus for fertilized or developing embryo. So fertilized meaning fertilization process of fusing sperm and an egg, and then embryo is what you have before 9 weeks from that. So you have a zygote, the first cell, then you do a lot of divisions, that's an embryo up until 9 weeks, then it becomes a fetus. So that's the endometrium. And so that's the layer that gets shed off each month. And then from there we have the vagina. Vagina, again, serving kind of as a birth canal. When they talk about like cervical dilation, you're talking about like the exit here. So there actually is a passageway that kind of goes all the way through. I just didn't draw it. So cervix would be kind of the bottom of that uterus. All right, with the vagina, it is going to be protected by the vestibule, so labia minora, labia majora, kind of surrounding and protecting that opening, and they're going to also have the ability to secrete lubricant, but also an acid throughout that vagina to help protect the environment. All right, everyone, thanks for watching.